Hi everyone. Thanks for letting us abuse your lunch hour, and for you to come to Exchange Square to this this impromptu event, somewhat impromptu, planned in the last 3 weeks. I'm Pamela Mar. I'm the managing director of the ICC Digital Standards Initiative. I'm actually based in Singapore because Singapore is one of the funders of the Digital Standards Initiative. But I actually spent a long time working in Hong Kong in supply chain, so I'm kind of like I'm loyal to two economies, one could say, and I want both to succeed. So for those of you who don't know, the Digital Standards Initiative was started by the International Chamber of Commerce around 3 years ago with the aim to enable the digitalization of all global supply chains, and to do so in a way that drives inclusivity, interoperability, and expansion. And the way to do that is by unifying and harmonizing standards around global trade and the digitalization of global trade through trade documents. So ICC's the Digital Standards Initiative. We've got a roadmap that focuses on standards, trust, building digital trust so you can actually trust the data that you receive, legal reform, meaning that economies need to enact legal reforms to enable businesses to use electronic records in trade and in trade finance, and building capability because not enough people in the world are actually trained on digitalization and digital supply chain. So when we set about doing this, we realized that across each of these areas, actually what makes an economy succeed in any of these areas is actually not just technical capability, but rather human capability, the policy environment, business readiness, the actual practice. And so we wanted a way to engage policymakers and leaders to really focus their attention that you can change the laws, but it doesn't mean businesses will actually be able to take advantage. You can adopt standards, you can impose standards, but you really need to train up people and businesses to adopt the practice and habits. So this index is that tool to engage policy and business leaders on building the multifaceted capabilities that any economy will need to implement digital trade and to really benefit from trade. Because, you know, we say that our objective is to digitalize trade, but that's actually only the kind of sub-objective. The real end game is about bringing prosperity to more and more people. And so in order to do that, it's not just enough to digitalize trade. You have to do so in a manner that makes trade more open, less opaque, more accessible, and more accessible especially to small and medium-sized enterprises and to poor countries who use trade as their first rung to really drive growth and build indigenous capabilities and become leaders in any given area. So this is the index. So actually the index was one of my first projects when joining the Digital Standards Initiative 16 months ago. And when I thought, okay, well, I want to create an index, but I can't do it. Even DSI can't do it, ICC can't do it. So we need partners. So partners are great because they enable you to share the load. And so we have two partners. The first is the unrivaled global network of the Milken Institute. So if you want anyone to pay attention to anything, you got to get the financiers interested. And Milken, you started in the finance industry, and now it's a global network for engaging policymakers worldwide. Milken Institute, and then the other one, you need someone who's actually got brain power in order to crunch the numbers and make it make sense. And that's the Asia Global Institute, based right here in Hong Kong in HKU. And I have a very special feeling for the AGI because it was formerly the Fung Global Institute, where I spent many long hours dialoguing with Andrew Sheng, the first and founding president of the Fung Global Institute, who is now here with us today for the panel. So thanks very much. I'm going to turn it over to Curtis Chin, who's going to give you some words of wisdom on behalf of the Milken Institute. Following Curtis, we'll go into the AGI team to take you through the panel with Heiwai, Jonathan, and Shu Yi, and then we'll go into a panel And then we've got one business leader from Hong Kong who's going to arrive a bit late because of another engagement. So Marjorie Yang will come to give the closing remarks. So thank you all for coming. Curtis, over to you.
Hey, thank you, Pamela. Some of you I know from all my various parts of my life. So before I joined the Milken Institute, I was with U.S. Treasury, and we're here to help. But I was a representative on the board of the Asian Development Bank, and way back before then, I represented the Hong Kong government. So our team helped launch the Asia's World City brand, and so it's so great to be back. At Milken Institute we talk a lot about Singapore because that's our home, our hub city. But so wonderful to be back here in Hong Kong. For those of you who don't know, the Milken Institute, nonprofit, nonpartisan, founded by Michael Milken out of Los Angeles. And I think our fancy mission is about accelerating measurable progress towards more meaningful lives. But for me, a lot of it comes back down to this notion of that you might have a lot of capital. But what do you do with that capital? Yeah, you all want to be richer, nations want to be richer, but whether you're an institution or an individual, we really encourage people to think about how that capital is deployed, new ways to raise capital. And so, a line I always steal from Mike Milken is he talks about you might have a great idea for a business, an index, a charity, a cure for cancer, but sometimes if you don't have access to capital, it just stays a great idea. And so for me, the Milken Institute is really about connecting and convening. So for us, it's a delight to partner with Pamela, with I know it from the phone days, but the Asian Global Institute, because I think we need to come together and get things done. And so this week is actually Mega Week in Hong Kong. So I saw one release that was like, it's Mega Finance Week. But then with Art Basel, Hong Kong, no, it's Mega Art Week. And then this weekend we had, Hong Kong was a leg on the Triathlon World Cup, so it's Mega Sports Week. So whether it's arts, culture, sports, it's Mega Hong Kong Week. How exciting is that? But for me, whether it's art, sports, my world of finance, or why we're here about trade, it's all about connections. And so for me, when Pamela asked me to share a thought or two before we get to the really good substance, I can't give away the rankings because they're going to share all that with you. But for me, it's about connecting, convening. Some of you will be at our Milken Institute, our very first inaugural Global Investor Symposium. We chose to put it here in Hong Kong. So that opens this evening. It's a whole day of activities here. Because Hong Kong, for me, is always also about not just East and West, but connections. And so we want that really to continue. We have coming up in May, I think a couple of you might even be there, our big Milken Institute Global Conference, which is in Los Angeles. Here I was saying Los Angelino, so those of you who are coming back to LA, it's terrific. And then in September we have our Asia Summit in Singapore, where Hong Kong is actually very well represented there. So it's all about connecting and convening. And so Pamela sent me like 2 prompts, was, why is this index so important for the Milken Institute? And we're all about trade, we're all about connection. And my life on the board of the Asian Development Bank was all about regional integration. How do we get countries to come together? North, South, East, West. So for us, this index hopefully is also a way to encourage countries to both come together, because it's all about trade, but also we like to compete. In Hong Kong, we're about competition. So some people are like, oh, why did we move up? Why did we move down? Because I was there for the Alpha launch. And I said, don't think of it as moving up or down. It's really the pace of progress. Hopefully everyone on this index is moving forward, but then some are moving forward faster than you. So you got to think through, what do we need to do? And so you'll hear more about kind of like the 5 factors or so. At the Milken Institute, we focus a lot on human capital. So everyone thinks we're all about money and finance, true, but also think about the power of human capital. And so one of my colleagues, Kevin Clouden, in this beautiful book, and I think there's a PDF probably that's going to be launched today, but one of my colleagues, Kevin, talks about human capital. And so how does that fit into this world? The reality is, if you're in the trading world, sometimes things are hindered or sped forward because of the state of the human capital of the people involved in the trade. And it could be as simple as you think about the background of people even have access to the internet. So what are all the factors that play into the factor of human capital? So I encourage you to read all the essays in this book, because it'll go a little bit deeper into some of those factors. So that's one reason at Milken Institute why we love this index. You think about what goes into it, but also one reason we love it is because it's about a conversation. Because some people say, why don't you put this into the index versus that? But this should really continue to spark that conversation about what more we can all do to move things forward, whether it's policy or training my colleagues or improving the technologies and access to these kinds of things. I'll just close by saying, those of you who know me at Milken, I'm always Mr. Positive. The world could be falling apart, but I will find something wonderful about it. And so for me, one of the wonderful things right now at this time of war, geopolitics, is trade. Trade connects. So you hear about rivalries in trade, but for me, when I think about connectivity, there's nothing like economics and finance to power that connectivity. And so hopefully this is also the continuation of not just real trade, but also a trade in ideas. That different countries, well, I'm only at this level on your ranking, but even that country that ranks X versus the one that's X minus 5, I bet we can learn both ways from those countries. So that's my spiel. Heiwai, I'm going to turn it over to you and your colleagues to get to the core substance. And when you see it, I do hope you share it out there. Those of you know, also I'm out of control on social media. So I'll be tweeting all of you up here. And Pamela's team has put together some great infographics that will sum up some of the key findings also. So thank you. Heiwai.
I'm the boring professor who's going to talk about the substance of this ranking. First of all, thank you, Curtis, and also the team from the Milken Institute, and obviously thank you, Pamela, and her colleagues at the International Chamber of Commerce for getting us, Asia Global Institute, to be part of this wonderful exercise. So I spent quite a few years in Washington, D.C., and you know, many organizations like the Heritage Foundation or the World Bank like to rank countries. And after the ranking is released, there will be usually a lot of discussions or maybe lobbying by individual governments or some disagreements across countries. Here we are not trying to create tension or anything that Curtis described, but try to have a ranking for us to think about first, what is digital trade? And second, why it is important? And third, why some economies are doing slightly better than the others, and how best practices can be shared in the community, in the region especially, and also across the world. I think, as Curtis said, we are living in a very interesting world with a lot of unexpected events breaking out, from a different corner in the globe. And I agree with him totally that it is very important to get back to connectivity, to the basic idea that we need economic development. We need to think more about productivity and try to at least not to be bothered too much by geopolitical tension and all sort of things that may not make us very excited, very positive today. So what I'm going to do is just give a very general overview about the ranking. And at the Asia Global Institute, we have several mandates, obviously, doing policy research that promote discussions as well as potentially policy changes is one of them. But the other thing is to promote the next generation thought leaders and researchers. So this is actually an excuse for me not to speak for too long, because I'm going to pass the stage to Shu Long, who is actually the one doing most of the difficult work, getting all the data from all around the world, putting 27 different sub-indices, so that we have 5 indicators and finally the ranking. And also we have Jonathan Su, who just joined us last year with a PhD in finance from Washington University, and he's going to talk about digital trade and the relationship with finance, which is obviously very important for Hong Kong, and how digital trade activities can promote more growth as well as new financial activities. And obviously the panel is going to talk about something that is important for the business community in Hong Kong and also for the policy community. As we all know, supply chains have been restructured due to geopolitics, due to the pandemic, due to new rising stars in the world, especially in this region. People like to talk about ASEAN as the future trade and economic engine. And because of the pandemic, we have gone through quite a lot of difficulties, but there's one silver lining of the pandemic is that a lot of economies, especially in Asia, have become more digitized. If you have been to Malaysia, Singapore, Thailand, or Indonesia recently, you realize that the speed of digital transformation has been amazing. You can use different types of e-payment systems and applications to get delivery service as well as pay for your ride. In China, as we know, 40% of the economy, according to the official statistics, is actually digitized. Online payment system, e-commerce, etc. But if you focus on the growth of digital economy, is actually in ASEAN. So one question is, how can this domestic development in digital economy help connection or increase connectivity across countries, and how sort of domestic economic transformation can become global economic transformation. So this is one of the motivations for us to think about digital trade and come up with a digital trade index. A quarter of the retail sector has been digitized thanks to the expansion of the e-commerce platforms. Now people like to talk about cross-border e-commerce. Is it happening? If it is not happening as much as we want, why it is not happening? Is it because of policy barrier? Is it because of lack of human capital? Or is it because of lack of infrastructure investment, right? So these are all the things that we look at in this indicator. So, why digital trade is good? Standard economic theory would tell you that first, it can lower transaction costs and trade costs. So there will be more trade, including trade in services. And second, as we all talk about supply chain restructuring, we also want to have stronger and more resilient supply chains. In theory, if digital technologies can be used to organize activities along the supply chains and to be prepared for unexpected shocks in the future, supply chains can be more resilient if digital trade is more prominent. And third, obviously, digital trade can allow more non-tradable activities to be tradable. For example, during the pandemic, a lot of us, having Zoom meetings, right? Thanks to new digital platform and applications, now a lot of the services can also be traded. When many economies, including some of the middle income countries, become more service-oriented, when the demand for manufactured products may decline due to population aging, the new growth engine is going to be, how new service activities can be created and can be traded across border. So all these are, basic broad reasons for why digital trade should be promoted, and how government should think really harder about policies that harness digital trade growth. And why, Global Trade Modernization Index, GTMI, is because we want to inform policymakers about first, what is digital trade policy, and second, why some economies are doing better than the others. And also, we also want to talk about best practices for the business stakeholders, for the investors to be more aware of this new development, to pay attention on which jurisdiction actually has better business environment or high level of readiness to embrace this global economic transformation. And third, obviously, as Curtis has been saying, we want to use this as an opportunity, as a platform for different countries, different governments to work together, right? To work together, not to keep fighting, but to find this in addition to climate change and all sort of things that many people say could be the common area, the common ground for countries with different interests and ideologies to think about solutions, to think about opportunities to collaborate. So, as I said, I'm going to be very general. The real substance is going to be coming from younger people. So Shuyi is going to talk about the methodologies and the ranking, and then Jonathan is going to talk about how to use the ranking and how some economies can be improved in some of the 5 areas of digital trade performance. Okay, thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Shu Yi. Like Heiwai mentioned, I work at AGI, hoping to be the next generation thought leader, but I'm not there yet. So today I'm going to walk you through how we build this index and the result of it. So as Heiwai mentioned, the goal of this index is to get a better understanding of the development of digital trade and to hopefully accelerating the adoption of digital trade. So the first question that we need to answer is, how do we measure progress and how do we measure it on a global scale? When we made this index, we've been through a lot of the index and reports, and we also consulted and we worked with our panel of advisors. And then we identified 27 indicators, which we divided into 5 categories here. Each of these categories is intended to capture the key components of government, private sector, and workforce digital trade readiness. You can also check it out on our website. And next, we have the result of the beta version index. If you have followed our alpha version launch, you will notice that the indicators that we use are actually the same, but the data is different. The data is updated here. And that is also the major reason why we think it's necessary to launch another version this year. Because back when we made the first version in October 2022, the data that we could get is mostly from 2019, 2018, or even earlier, because back then getting data and doing survey is very difficult because of pandemic and all the disruptions. But last year in 2023, international travel were resumed, and many organizations and research institutes are able to get new data and do new analysis. That's why we think it's important that we update our index here. This is only part of the index. You can check out the full list after today's launch on AGI's website. And next, we have the weighting schemes. In this index, we actually use 2 weighting schemes. And we actually tried out 4 to 5 weightings to see the result. And the result didn't change much. So this is to ensure you that we didn't manipulate the weighting to put Hong Kong or Singapore at the top, because Singapore is actually number 1, however we weighted. So, good for Singapore. And here you can see that we put more weight on paperless trade because, again, this index is trying to shed light on progress on digital trade, and paperless trade is by far the most straightforward measurement. And you can also see that we put 10% or less weight on 2 pillar trade openness and human capital, because these 2, at least with the data that we can get right now, these 2 indicators, these 2 pillar cover very broad topics and they don't directly translate into digital trade progress. But still, it's very important to include them here because in a very extreme scenario, if a country is very, paperless, digitize everything, but they are not open, they do not trade with other countries, then all the paperless and digital development would be meaningless to the international trade ecosystem. So here's the weighting. And then we have the breakdown of Hong Kong's score. Well, overall, Hong Kong is doing pretty well. We ranked number 4 out of 65 economies. But here I'd like to highlight our weighting at paperless trade. Compared to the first version of the index, Hong Kong is now lower in terms of paperless trade. And that is because although Hong Kong is still pretty advanced in terms of paperless trade, we're 9 out of 65 economies. In the past couple of years, Hong Kong didn't make much progress. So that means while other countries are, developing various trade platform, digital infrastructure, and making bilateral or multilateral agreement with other trade partners, Hong Kong didn't make that much progress. That's why we're now at number 9. And I think that should serve as a reminder or an alarm to Hong Kong that other countries are developing and changing really fast. So we really need to do something to catch up with the rest of the world. And next, here's the breakdown of other economies that are worth noticing. So please note that here most countries rank pretty low in trade openness. That's because the top, I think 23 to 25 spots are occupied all by EU countries. They have the same trade openness status. They're essentially one market. So you can basically consider UAE or Singapore as the second and third in terms of trade openness. And next, I already talked about how we should interpret this index. I think in the next stage of digital trade development, it's very essential that all the economies work together to develop international standardization and interoperability. And now I'll turn things over to Jonathan to deep dive into some of the scores.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very grateful to be given the opportunity here to come and tell you a bit more about some of the real outcomes, why are some of the pillars in the GTMI very important, and what are some of the best practices that we here at AGI have observed in some of our research. So one thing you'll note from out of those pillars is that a couple of the pillars are are generally associated with sort of domestic policies, whereas others usually reflect kind of a multilateral or cooperative initiatives. An example would be paperless trade. Paperless trade policies can be initiated at the domestic level, or as we have observed, they can commonly take the form of trade agreements between countries. Why is this important? Well, it's because the way we see it, digital trade is a two, or in many cases, a multi-way street. That requires policies which promote interoperability as well as standards for digital trade documentation. I think if there's one takeaway that we've observed from our research, it's that no nation, no country can really advance in terms of their digital trade capabilities without also involving some degree of cooperative measures with other countries. That, from our perspective, has been a real key driver for a lot of the growth that we've observed over the last couple of years. This cooperation really allows all participants to realize the growth potential that Heiwai pointed out of digital trade. And the key here that I would like to illustrate in the following slide is digital trade agreements which implement standards and common frameworks. So this is a lot of numbers, so I'm going to break it down for you all pretty briefly. This chart here illustrates, looks at the number of provisions within digital trade agreements, or at the very least, the average number of provisions within a digital trade agreement for a given country that specifically deals with a particular metric for digital trade. You can see we've categorized a lot of these on the left-hand side, but I'd like to highlight a couple of the values. The first is, well, the total is actually a bit difficult to see, but I think a big takeaway here is that Hong Kong is doing fairly well, especially compared to the global average. The global average usually is sitting around like 8.5 or so, and then Hong Kong is sitting here at around 10.6 on average across the 8 trade agreements that we are a part of. On the other hand, when you observe the values for other Asian nations, you'll observe that other Asian nations have made tremendous progress, leaps and bounds in this area. Singapore is really kind of leading the pack here. You observe that South Korea and Japan are also up there. And I'd really like to also highlight Thailand and Malaysia for doing particularly well on this metric. Why would I like to highlight Thailand and Malaysia? Well, I think those two countries currently are, I believe, within the top 5 fastest growing e-commerce markets currently globally. So it's sort of like a common thread. If you would take away one thing from this chart, it's that digital trade agreements or digital trade provisions that are specifically internalized within trade agreements are really strongly associated with some of the most rapidly growing digital economies that we have around the world. I'd also like to point out, as Xu brought up, the 2 pillars of paperless trade and trade openness. Paperless trade in particular can be reflected in the 2 rows that we've highlighted here, which is the electronic transactions frameworks and digital trade facilitation. One critical one critical sub-element within these is the adoption of MLETR, which is essentially a common framework for countries to handle electronic transferable records, which are a critical source of documentation for international trade. And you'll observe that some of the largest differences, especially between Asia and the rest of the world, lies in this category. And I believe that it is really this category that policymakers could be looking to really execute on strong improvements in the future if Hong Kong wishes to kind of catch up with the rest of the pack and really join those countries in terms of how rapidly they can advance their digital trade capabilities. Now, to bring it all home, I'd like to really discuss why this is all important for finance. And for this, we really need to discuss digital trade financing. Digital trade financing should probably not be news to any of you here. It is really crucial for the Hong Kong economy. Hong Kong really has a very strong comparative advantage as a logistics hub, as a facilitator for international trade. But really, this advantage is pretty strongly tied to our status as a major financial center. There is, however, a current and emerging issue, which is the emergence of what we like to call digital islands. These are really a result of many individual countries not developing their digital trade financing capabilities in sync and really developing them kind of individually. What this means is that it's very easy to make one-to-one connections and quite difficult to make one-to-many connections. This may be okay on the scale of a single country, but when we talk about really scaling up digital trade and really getting everybody involved, there really should be some concerted effort to coordinate standards. I brought up earlier electronic transferable records. The adoption of MLETR really is a key part in getting rid of this sort of digital islands model that we seem to be falling into and really moving towards this kind of, this picture where everybody can really coordinate to advance forward in digital trade capabilities. Two examples of how we would coordinate standards would be adopting legislative frameworks for electronic transferable records, as well as setting common ground for the technology elements that would produce seamless and trusted data exchange between countries. That closes at least my section. We would at this time, we'd be welcome to take any questions from the audience for either of the three of us. Yes, sir.
Well, first of all, thank you very much indeed for this innovative index. China is a global e-commerce giant.
Yes.
China is the world's largest e-commerce giant and has the world's largest cohort of STEM manpower, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. So why is China ranked relatively low in your league table?
I think this question I'd like to toss that question over to Sheng.
Yeah.
So the question is why China is low in human capital, or is it low in general?
In the whole overall ranking.
Yeah, I think China, let me check the.
I think it's the paperless trade that help you as well.
I think, well, yeah, first of all, in terms of paperless trade, China, just like, Hong Kong, we have few agreement with other trade partner in terms of, exchange of electronic document and especially data. That is a big part of this index. It's 30% of the index. And also in terms of regulatory environment, China is doing pretty, it's developing fast, but it's not there yet compared to the high ranker like the EU countries and even Singapore. So I think that's the two indicators that pull China back a little bit. Okay.
So I think we have to look at front end and back end. So e-commerce is trade. It means that actually some digital platform was used in the ordering of a good. But digital trade encompasses everything from the raw material production, logistics, manufacturing, and delivery, not just the ordering part. So China, yeah, you're right, absolute leader in e-commerce. Like 90%, right, of commerce in China is ordered digitally. But if you look at the back end, a lot of the back end process is still very paper-based. So I think, when we say digital trade, we mean that digital means and technologies are used at any part of the raw material to delivery process. And so, for China, electronic transferable records are not yet fully legal tender, although we are working directly with the Ministry of Commerce on this to train up their civil servants to actually enable them to adopt this new legislation. Only 9 economies globally have done this. And our advice, of course, is develop the capability and then adopt the law, rather than, adopt the law and scramble and so on. So China's absolutely doing the right thing. I would also say that China is piloting the use of electronic transferable records in 2 free trade zones, one in Shanghai, one in Beijing. And if you know anything about how China goes about implementation, one, you pilot, prove it works, work out all the kinks, and then you go big. So I would say that China's so-called underperformance is actually not an underperformance. And if you look at, by GDP per capita, actually China is slightly outperforming its so-called station. So that's sort of my take on it. And also the last thing is that, there's a big gap in China between what is happening in the major urban centers and also what's happening in the hinterland. And actually, a lot of the manufacturing still take place in the hinterland, and so a lot of those processes still remain very analog. But country's moving fast, and so I'm looking forward to the next year's version. So if there's, are there any other questions about the index in specific? Come up here, Shuyi.
Hi, I'm Cara. Thank you for the presentation. Actually, I looked at the human capital index. I'm not sure, is it a human capital focused on supply chain, or is human capital all across the board for this index analysis? The reason why I look at it is because, again, China is 4.1, but as we all know that China have a booming graduation of even though master degree students and etc. And Hong Kong is actually, I saw it, it's ranking 9%, if I didn't look at it wrong. So it means that Hong Kong has more talent than China, but why Hong Kong has the policy of importing talents from other places that is in like half lower ranking as Hong Kong, and Singapore is 10, so Singapore is doing great in that. I believe that in the last few years there is a lot of talents migrated to Singapore, but that's my question. What is the area of capturing the data, and why, like, if the government is look at this index, why the policies not represent that?
Yeah, well, first of all, China has a really big population, so it's a big pool of talent. But this index, it measures the overall, so it's more like an average. And also, like I mentioned earlier, we put very little weight on human capital because the data that we can get right now, it's not specifically targeting, digital trade or even digital economy. It's very broad, like, education and digital skills and all that. So in that sense, again, it's probably not the perfect reflect of human capital here. Yeah, does that answer your question?
Yeah.
All right, so thanks everyone. We've actually got a really stellar panel. So I would like to invite Bertrand Chen, who's the CEO of the Global Shipping Business Network, to come on. Howard Lee, who is the Deputy CEO of the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, and Andrew Sheng, who is a distinguished fellow and a distinguished thought leader of the Asia Global Institute. Thanks, guys, for being here. Maybe just to continue on the reflections from the index, can you just give us your kind of first gut reactions to does it make sense, especially the part about Hong Kong, and what are your key takeaways from this? Maybe start with Howard.
Thank you very much, Pamela, for having me. And on the index, it's hot off the printer, so I haven't got the time to really study it in detail. But for my initial first impression, and then I'm not too sure I'm the most qualified one to comment on this trade-related aspects. But my first impression is probably in terms of paperless trading in the big category, we are a little bit behind. I think that's quite understandable in the sense that we don't have a trade single window, which will come on board 2 years from now. I hope that we will be catching up pretty quickly. I think that has something to do with the philosophy somehow of the Hong Kong government in pushing the digital economy, in the sense that in the past it has been extremely cautious in trying to be innovative, creative, and at the same time being inclusive, in the sense that there's a segment of community which is less tax savvy, and so that if you push everything, that must be e-platform oriented, probably some smaller entrepreneur would be left behind. This is a balance that's to be struck, and as I said, hopefully in a couple of years' time, we will be catching up. My biggest surprise is more on the category of what we call the trade openness. Jonathan just now provided a little bit more breakdown, so I watched it very carefully. Again, I am not an expert on this, because when you talk about trade openness, I would have thought that Hong Kong would have scored pretty high, but quite contrary, it's a little bit different. And I also look at the sub-score, and I was pretty surprised that we score 0 mark in terms of market access, 0 mark in terms of internet access, and 0 mark in terms of cybersecurity. I don't know how one can score 0 marks, but that's fine. I think these are reminders that we need to work harder, but perhaps it would be a lot easier for the jurisdiction to really understand the methodology and the criteria, because I think we all want to improve, but the important thing is we know how to improve, especially we got 0 marks.
Yeah, okay, so Bertrand, a view from the front lines. Reflections, especially on the factors that Howard mentioned.
Yeah, so thank you for inviting me to give you this on this panel. So first, my reflection, I think, is I feel like we're kind of like Asian parents who just got a score on the kids and looking at the score very attentively. And if I have to remind you guys, I think there's a saying in the US where they say A students work for B students and C students become president. I think maybe that's like So I wouldn't pay too much attention to the scores, but I think what's important is to look at the progression and the change, right? And direction travel is very important. With that in mind, I think from Global Shipping Business Network, the company I work for, we are a blockchain consortium. We have some of the major shipping line in the world, Costco Shipping Line, WOCL, some terminal, Hutchison Port, PSA, as our shareholders. And we are deeply involved in digitization of the industry. And all the metrics that was mentioned are all very relevant. And we see that as a key element, like MLATR adoption, that's very important. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that how Hong Kong is ready for that, capture the full opportunity for Hong Kong. And here I'd like to give an example. So for instance, paperless trade, which I think is 30 or 35%, the weighting depending which weighting you look at. In order to realize that, on GSBN we have something called electronic bill of lading, which is get rid of paper bill of lading to be electronic bill of lading, and that's a key document that's required for shipping. If you can do that, plus trade finance, which Hong Kong is actually really strong at, you actually move away from the geographical constraint of Hong Kong. You can actually finance trade globally, not just Hong Kong, offshore finance for China, for Southeast Asia, for even Europe. So a lot of the metric that you're seeing here, for instance, saying Germany or Netherlands is ahead of Hong Kong, predominantly because of paperless trade, I don't think it's as relevant as opposed to what's the opportunity for Hong Kong to capture this. And one example is right now we're working with HKMA on some of the POC to look at how can we tokenize the electronic bill of lading into the project or Project Ansem, what HKMA is doing, which I think is highly relevant for Hong Kong as a city. And that's something that's potentially missing in those index, right? Because the index really just saying from today, how ready are you? But maybe the world of tomorrow is going to be very different once we have digital trade, and there's opportunity for Hong Kong to capture. And that's, I think, missing in this index.
Okay, thank you. Andrew.
Thanks, Pamela, for inviting me. I want to thank Heiwai for bringing me here on this very important occasion. When we were in Fung Global Institute, you taught me a lot about environment, and the Fung brothers taught me about trade. So in an area that I was, totally ignoramus because I'm a finance guy. But what this event has done, I think I want to congratulate AGI and its partners, Milken and the others, is that this is a very important step. When you're on a path, whatever you're doing, you have to have some measures. And I think the index is a very important path towards self-realization, comparator, and then a story that begins the conversation of change. I think Curtis was fantastic. He really talked about the connections. And Hong Kong is being a super connector, and we have to go back to basics. Hong Kong was built on trade, right? Its success depends upon the connectivity. And what really made Hong Kong was because of the free trade and the free port and free finance, not zero interest, but free, relatively free, is actually you broke down silos. And the only way you can break down silos, which you call digital, I think it was Jonathan who said it's digital island, is that you share data, you share standards, you share processes, and you share rules. And then across this is sharing of values, right? And so, are we going to be different? We reduce this to a story. And that story is that index. So I think what you've done is a very important step. It doesn't really matter to me whether we're number 4 or number 5 or number 8 or 18. As Bertrand says, it's where we're heading. And I think, at this particular point of time, this is a fantastic. Now, I really want to say that, where I don't see in this standard at this particular point of time is where's the green part of it, right? I mean, obviously trade standards run away from the environmental issues. And it'd be very nice in your, later versions would add a little bit of that so that you encourage people to focus on the green, right? And also inclusivity. Why do I say this? It's because the 2 major challenges that we all face is net zero, that means either we burn up, or the inequality in this imbalances in this world, which had no indices. I mean, the inequality issues that we've seen, but trade is a very good way of narrowing this. And trade should be a very good way of bringing people together. And the real danger that we worry about, of course, as you know, is that trade is splitting us all up. And I think that's why I want to congratulate, you all for leading this effort.
Yeah, so one of the things that I said in the opening was that we want to drive an interoperable, harmonized global trading system where the rules are clear, the rules are simple, and where data can be shared and not have to have, especially a lot of administrative burden to cut and recut data for different kinds of platforms, different networks, and so on. And this, for me, is actually the key to having, for building ESG data from the supply chain. Bertrand, you've also talked about digital shipping as sustainable shipping. Can you just tell us a bit why you see these as kind of two peas in a pod?
Yeah. So I think the shipping industry so far still is on this journey toward digitization. It's still not as digital as it could be, but it's making progress. The decarbonization of the shipping, that's the new challenge, right? And I think across all the shipping line, the most prominent one probably is Maersk, Danish shipping line, who's making a lot of inroads and investment in that. And most recently, I think at the IMO meeting, sorry, not the IMO meeting, or the climate meeting, there is, I think, 6 of the larger shipping lines who made a commitment not to purchase anymore the old vessel with bad fuel. But the biggest challenge of this is when you do decarbonization of shipping, it's intangible, meaning the ship is not arriving more on time. You don't have more capacity. It's not cheaper. Actually, it's probably more expensive. So really, what are you paying for when you decarbonize shipping? Is you're paying more money for essentially an exchange of data. Someone tells you, look, this is the data proof that actually I've done the action I told you I did. And if you recall when EU ETS, which is a the trading system for carbon credit in Europe, was first implemented in 2010, early 2010, there was massive VAT scam, I think to the tune of $10 billion, where essentially the tax treasury in Europe got fleeced by a bunch of scammers because all those carbon credits are based on nothing really, and people were trading that. So that's, I think, the biggest risk right now for the shipping industry. So some of qualms from some of the shipping line is like, I'm being asked to make that such large investment in decarbonization of shipping. It's going to be very, very expensive. How do I prove to share the data? And that's actually one of the difficulty. Now, the good thing is, as the industry becomes more digitized, so if, let's say, EBL, Electronic Bill of Lading, which is a key document, is widely adopted, then this digital document, can also potentially encompass some information about carbon footprint, right? And it's something that you can share readily in the same process. So it's kind of really a greenfield area, and I think I'm quite hopeful for that. Right now, Maersk, Hapag-Lloyd, CMA, all the major European shipping have product where you can say, I pay extra money for this green product. But the reality is what you get is a PDF. It's just a PDF, you have to trust Maersk is doing the right thing. So that I don't think will last forever, all right? And it's not gonna scale because of that. So that's my take on it.
Okay, thank you. Howard, you're leading the FinTech charge with HKMA, and a lot of the drivers of FinTech is actually financial inclusion and actually digitalization of, not only creating new financial products, but also digitalization, the core banking products, and we've talked also about trade finance. Can you sort of tell us how it's going, and how are you building kind of the business case for banks to, progressively integrate, FinTech operations and so on in Hong Kong? And is this going to be a source of leadership for Hong Kong, or is it already?
Of course, we like to think this is a source of leadership on our part. Perhaps I explain it in 2 different ways. One is more like what you said, the traditional banking operation. One of our mandates is to really provide the infrastructure and also the regulation for banks. So we need to provide a conducive regulatory environment and even regulatory push for banks to really go digital. And we even have a baseline assessment on banks and make sure that they go up the digital curve. This is something that we have been doing for years. And in terms of infrastructure, one of the infrastructure that we have built is the commercial data interchange, which, as you know, Hong Kong is a small place. Data is more fragmented as compared to mainland. They have a pretty dominant e-commerce platform, but we don't have that. So we built a hub and spoke arrangement where we provide the infrastructure, data provider on one side, making one single connection into the hub, and then data user on the other side, which is banks and other financial institutions. So they also make one single connection. They would be able to consume the data in a legitimate way provided by the data sort of provider. So changing it to a pretty spaghetti-like interconnection arrangement to a very elegant hub and spoke. And this is already in production mode, and we have been facilitating billions dollars of credits creation and thousands of hundreds and thousands of credits. So this is more the traditional banking thing. Like what Bertrand talked about, we are also eyeing on the future because when we talk about tokenization, digitalization, also green reporting, everything really can be conceptualized and also implemented through digital format. When we talk about tokenization, digitalization, a lot of people thought about crypto and all that, which not to everybody's liking. But I briefly cut the digitalization into three big pieces. One is the crypto thing. It's more investment oriented, if not speculation oriented. The second part is how to tokenize and digitize existing financial processes, whether it's securitization or payment and all that. Third is some of the newer ways, talking about using the new technology to create asset like EBL, which could provide newer form of transaction to facilitate the real economy. The latter two parts are really touching the real economy. So very simply, we just launched a new project, which is called Project Ensemble, if you have read about it. Basically, while Bertrand has been busy looking for digitizing real-world assets, but without a corresponding payment means, it's extremely difficult to implement. So what we are doing is probably a world first in creating a layer to create the interoperability for both the payment link and also the asset link, and not just one single form of payment. We will provide the interface to connect like stablecoin that we are going to regulate, the digitized, tokenized bank deposit that we are going to promote, and also the CBDC that we are going to introduce going forward at some point. And on the asset side, so everyone is welcome to connect into it. So again, it's a hub and spoke. So we are making use of our convening power, our ability to create infrastructure for everyone to use, to provide an ecosystem and environment which would enable really the next generation of transaction on digitalization, tokenization. By the way, tokenization can include the kind of green reporting that we talk about because we piloted that through the issuance of 2 tranches of government green bond. And it's not just tokenizing the financial processes, but we also introduce a green reporting, everything into it, so that investor holding the token would be able to receive the green credential of the project on the chain as well. So these are the creative ideas that we are trying to do, and we welcome everybody to partner with us to pilot newer ideas as well.
So one of the things that you'll see in the index is that Asia has 3 economies in the top 10, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, and 3 or 4 in the bottom 10, which are, I don't need to mention them, but basically there's huge income gaps. And you know, the question for you, Howard, is, you know, as Hong Kong develops these platforms and capabilities and sort of demonstrates the model, to what extent do you think that it allows Hong Kong enterprises and Hong Kong capabilities to actually share the knowledge and share the know-how to actually help the rest of the region, who is not as developed, to develop these, to perhaps leapfrog, and through technology to allow Hong Kong to actually build new sources of competitiveness and new trading links?
Well, now, first of all, I think Hong Kong is very well placed to do these experiments, both on finances and also on trade, because we are a big financial hub, we are a big trading hub, and together with intermediation with trades between the mainland China and other parts of the world. But to be very honest, no one has the answer to what the future of this financial infrastructure would be like. Everybody is doing experiments, and we are a very open sort of society. We welcome, and actually we have a lot of international institutions, international players in our test, in our experiment, working together. So what we hope is we really want to provide the fertile ground for everybody to come here and then co-create the future of trade finance and finances for everybody. I would not say that we create something and we teach everybody, but we welcome and cherish and treasure the opportunity for everybody to come and pilot with us.
Okay, thank you. Andrew, you work with the Chinese government, you're working with the local government in Penang and across Malaysia and elsewhere. Any reflections on what we can together learn to speed up the pace of digitalization?
Well, I think digitalization is the way to go. There's no doubt about it, right? We think about the world in 3 phases. The first phase is the physical trade. Second phase is the finance trade. And third phase is the data trade, right? It's information flows. So when you think about that as networks, how do you actually match the physical and the finance is the delivery versus payment problem, right? You know, we now know, you know, if you deliver some physical good, I get paid. And how do we, you know, do this is a trust issue. But now in the digital area, we're actually exchanging information. And when we exchange information, am I exchanging an avatar of Andrew Sheng for payment? And is the avatar as good as Andrew Sheng, the real one? Right? The derivative, is it as good as the underlying? And it can only be as good as the underlying. Because the underlying is not right, the derivative goes wrong. We learn all this. So in this area, I think everybody is now, you know, really beginning to rethink the game. Now, why are they rethinking the game? The issue is that number one has realized that the if it's being challenged by number 2 or number 3 or number 4, you know, where in the supply chain has the choke point and the pain point create problems. And so therefore, if you're number 4, number 5, number 6, or number 7, you really think, how do I deal with this? Right? And these are the risks that we have now entered into a game, because the whole rules of the game, the standards, the processes, the structures are now changing all at the same time. Right? And so to this extent, I think it's extremely important that we come back to Curtis' fundamental point. It is about connectivity, it is about convening, it's about building trust in the system. And once we build the trust in the system, in those kind of trade, this is where the Hong Kongs of this world has a fundamental role. Because, you know, you can't ignore China, because that's nearly 1/5 or 1/4 of mankind. Neither can you ignore India, right? Or whatever. So to a large extent, as these, you know, giants begin to grow, the trade will grow, right? Take ASEAN. ASEAN is 1/2 of the population of China and 1/2 of the population of India. And it's got all the natural resources which India doesn't have and China doesn't have, and it will trade. So ASEAN countries clearly want to trade, right, with its giant neighbors, as well as trading with Europe and America and everybody else. So the fundamental policy issue now today, and which is why you notice that the ASEAN countries like Malaysia, Indonesia, Philippines are going gangbusters on digital trade. Because we know that it's not about, you know, C to C, consumer to consumer, or country to country. It really is about how do small countries, right, small economies, can do that connectivity and still survive. And that's the real world of hybrid economies. We don't have to operate on one standard, we operate on 2, 3, 4, you know, protocol standards. And that's where our, you know, market niches. And I think this is a conversation that we need to have at the WTO, at the ICC, all these. How do we develop the hybrid, plural, you know, interoperable standards that you were talking about?
Bertrand, Andrew brought up the issue of digital trust. How do you, within the Global Shipping Business Network, establish that digital trust So the trust in the data, the trust in the electronic records. Is blockchain the only answer? Or, is it that it's members only? And the same question for Howard. If the CDI is one of the answers to enabling finance to go to more SMEs in Hong Kong, is that something, or Hong Kong, or even the Greater Bay Area, will every country need its own network? Or can we kind of enlarge the data sharing environment with trust? And what is the key to that? So first, Bertrand, go ahead.
Yeah, so although global shipping business is based on blockchain, I'm not like a pro blockchain, meaning I'm agnostic. I think there's some nuanced take on that. So if you ask someone who's involved in the shipping industry in Europe, if they believe in blockchain, they all say, no, it's a scam, it doesn't work. If you're someone in mainland China, if blockchain, everybody's believing blockchain, that's the technology you have to use for all those solutions. So I think the truth is kind of between the two. I think for the shipping industry, it's based on relationship and trust, right? So every single shipment has a carrier, a shipping line, or a bulk carrier, someone that's moving the cargo, and there's a relation trust between them and the shipper. Then there's a consignee, who are the trader on the party. So to some degree, you do need an infrastructure like this to build a common understanding, common ledger of what's happening. And to my knowledge, if you want to resolve something at the global level, blockchain is actually a pretty darn good solution for that. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to put that on Bitcoin or Ethereum. It doesn't have to be public blockchain. It can be something private. And to the extent people trust, if someone's willing to trust Excel spreadsheet, you can use Excel spreadsheet also. But somehow I doubt that that will be a solution that people will want to use. To go back to your question about many geography and different location, right? The way I see it is every single country will want to implement some form of digital platform locally, right? Because the government wants to control the data, they want to put some rules in place. They're also very worried that someone may just take the data and run away with it. However, those locations will have to exchange data and communicate. So that's one aspect where I think GSBN or blockchain is a very good technology for that. And one of the vectors for that is potentially the shipping line, right? Container shipping lines, I don't know if you folks know, but the top 10 container shipping lines control 80% of the volume. So they actually don't need that many nodes to be able to capture this information or to have this exchange. And they are fundamentally the trusted party in global trade, right? So anyone who ships, they have to trust Maersk, Costco, OOCL, and therefore it's not that actually as hard to develop. But once you have this infrastructure, trusted infrastructure, the key question becomes what are the use cases, right? And as Howard said, if you can have electronic bill of lading that's transacted on this trusted blockchain, then potentially you can have trade finance linked to it, payment linked to it, financing to it, much more complex financing mechanism. So what I see today is on the subject of tokenization, for instance, where we got everybody excited about Bitcoin and Ethereum price going higher and higher, which is most of the use case for crypto is actually not really proven, right? It's all basically gambling, right? It's basically believe that we'll change something very fancy, very like finance, right? The future of finance. But the opportunity there is actually not as big as people think, right? You switch from T+3 settlement to T+1 settlement. How much benefit? But from the shipping industry, from global trade, that's like a 30 trillion per year business, right? 30 trillion repeated exchange. That today is now financed as efficiently as it could be, right? And I think that's fundamentally one opportunity that people don't look at as clearly, because it's really difficult. It's really hard to digitize also. But that's actually potentially something much more valuable, and not just smoke and mirror and then pumping a coin up 1,000%.
Thank you. Howard?
Okay, thank you. You asked me whether CDI, this kind of infrastructure would be needed in other jurisdictions. I would approach it this way, especially for this kind of a local domestic facility. I think we need to really look at the idiosyncratic situation of different economies. I just borrow a very familiar example, like mobile payment has been booming in the mainland, leading the world in the mainland, but probably it's not as much developed in other places, including a lot of advanced economy. In Hong Kong, we're doing a lot now, but still not unlike mainland. But there's some special situation over there 10 years ago. where mobile payment, the only competitor is cash. No one uses credit card, no one uses check, no one uses bank transfer. So that's the only game in town. So it's easy when you put mobile payment against cash. It's very clear who the winner will be. But in other places, the mobile payment is competing with a lot other different means. So you cannot say that we have a product which thrive in a particular jurisdiction and then you feel that it should also thrive in other jurisdictions. So I think this is one point. Second point, I think, is we need to really rise above individual application and individual infrastructure, but look at really what are the key ingredients for success and whether the ingredients are there in different places and what are the missing pieces and fill the missing pieces. Now, in terms of cross-border thing, I think it's important that, like Bertrand talked about, and you also talk about, is the connectivity and also the transfer of data and sharing of information. Now, if we look at this, I think what the DSI is trying to work on to develop the key data set that every jurisdiction would need to capture and then be ready to transfer. I think that's a lot more important than whether you have a particular infrastructure or not. Because in modern technology, even if locally you have different trade single window, different infrastructure, it's quite easy for us to do the interchange, exchange, and then create a kind of connectivity. But if you do not capture the data, then there's nothing you can do. So I believe this kind of information and standard is a lot more important than individual infrastructure project.
Okay, thank you. So we are coming to the end of the panel. So I would actually like to just ask the panel to give us kind of your final thoughts on what would you like to see happen in Hong Kong in space of digitalization of trade and finance within this year. Okay, so we talked big. We said, okay, trade can be more inclusive, it can be more efficient, et cetera, Let's talk about the near term. So what do you want to see happen? What is your kind of like one recommendation to either business or policymakers? So for Howard, you don't have to talk to the government. But what would you like to see in Hong Kong or even just for the rest of Asia? So who would like to start? Andrew.
Okay.
Andrew, the
I
thinker.
think, no, I'm not thinking. No. What I think is unprintable. No, in the short run. Sorry, I beg your pardon. In the short run, I think 1 year. I think the whole purpose of the game is to reduce transactions costs. And can we now demonstrate, whoever does this, is that can we reduce the transactions costs of doing business? Now, one reason why payments, cross-border payments for SMEs is now top priority is because, as you know, for SMEs to transact cross-border, the average cost is about somewhere up to 7% of the transaction amount. And I think whoever gets there first of reducing that transaction cost will be a major winner. And the only way you can do this is digital. So I think, and with trust. So I think, that's the good news that I'm hoping for.
Okay, thank you. Howard.
Well, I think that there's something that applies to trade and everything digitalization. I really hope to see everybody embracing a more open mindset and different mindset in adopting technology. Because to a lot of people, the threshold is pretty high. You need to invest in terms of real money in the system changes, and also invest in upgrading, upskilling the knowledge of yourself and your colleagues. But one has to have the conviction, this is the future, and then you would invest. Otherwise, you hesitate, you just embrace what I have and try to survive as long as possible. If though moving forward, it's extremely difficult. So it's not about the availability of technology. Very often, technology is the easiest part, so to speak. but changing the mindset, changing the processes to adopt the technology is really the key.
Okay, thank you. Bertrand.
Well, I'll try to answer your question. It's like by the end of this year. I think EBI adoption is definitely something that's important. We're seeing faster and faster adoption, not just on GSB and other platforms as well. One thing I hope to see is the project ensemble that Howard mentioned earlier, that we have some meaningful result from it, right? And not just a POC, EBL plus payment. I'm hopeful for that because after the project ensemble was announced, we've been receiving a lot of inquiry from commercial banks, who traditionally has been pretty passive. And I think this time it seems like they're waking up and say, well, it's this thing is announced. I don't want to fall behind other commercial bank and how we should be thinking more creatively of leveraging the sandbox. So that I'm hopeful that by the end of this year we'll have something really useful, hopefully.
Okay, thank you. So technology to solve problems in trust, in transaction cost, and in trade openness. So thanks a lot, Bertrand, Howard, and Andrew. I'd like to now ask Marjorie Yang, who has joined us, to give us some final thoughts from the podium. Go ahead.
Ladies and gentlemen, forgive me for being late. But today I'm very humbled by the opportunity to address this distinguished forum. First of all, I'd like you to give a round of a hand to our distinguished speakers, Andrew, Bertrand, Curtis, Howard, Pamela, and Heiwai. About a round of applause. Well, over the years, I've witnessed the world undergo unprecedented challenges, from the ravishing effects of a global pandemic to the disruptive forces of war-driven supply chain disruptions. Digital trade has proven to be a lifeline for economies around the globe, enabling the seamless flow of goods and services, even when traditional supply chains were strained to their limits. Or perhaps I should say, at least, that's the promise. It is encouraging that governments around the world are recognizing the tremendous opportunities that arise from trade digitization. They are embracing the transformative potential of digital technologies to enhance the efficiency, transparency, and security of global trade. By harnessing the power of digital trade, nations can unlock new avenues for economic growth, job creation, and sustainable development. In the alpha version of the Global Trade and Modernization Index, GTMI, released in March last year, Hong Kong was the second highest scoring economy in both rankings using different weightings, just behind Singapore. However, in the refreshed version just released today, there is a notable slip. Hong Kong now finds itself in the 4th position, and paperless trade is still our weakest part when compared to Singapore. Despite the setback, Hong Kong has long been regarded as an international financial center, a shining beacon of economic prowess in the region, and still remains a significant player in the international trade arena with remarkable potential. The convergence of digital trade, fintech, and trade finance presents an unparalleled opportunity for Hong Kong to forge ahead and shape the future of global commerce. Our deep connection with mainland China, world-class infrastructure, and robust regulatory framework. All these resources act as a magnet for digital trade, facilitating seamless transactions and enabling businesses of all sizes to thrive. But competing on digital needs, government has to be forward-looking. We are making good progress on digital finance, given the strong platform offered by HKMA. We need a similar push to compete on trade. Model law on electronic transferable records, MLETR, I don't know how to pronounce that. Alignment would be a good start. And by fostering an ecosystem that nurtures innovation, encourages entrepreneurship, and promotes digital integration, Hong Kong can become a global leader in the digital economy, attracting investments, talent, and partnerships from around the world. Though Hong Kong still looks at Singapore as a strong contender with us in different aspects. I think competition is so important. If you don't have somebody breathing on your neck, you don't move faster. So it's wonderful to have Singapore. And of course, Penang. I have a long history with Andrew related to Penang. I am sure all cities in Asia will continue to evolve and compete in a dynamic digital trade landscape, driving innovation and contributing to the regional digital economy. Let us work hand in hand to unlock the full potential of digital trade, and in doing so, build a prosperous and sustainable future for all. Thank you very much.